team.
And now we are joined by the Kirinyaga County Woman MP, Njeri Maina, who is here with us in studio. Thank you for your time. Good morning. And shortly, as I've mentioned earlier, we'll be joined by Maina Karobia, who is an MP at the East African Legislative Assembly. Well, coming to you first, Anthony, 4 key pointers that anyone can deduce from the statements made by the lawmakers yesterday. The fourth liberation, says Anthony Uluoch, the Mathare MP. This is going to be peaceful procession, according to Babu Owino. We'll seek the way forward from the people. That is also from Babu Owino. But the police say that we won't allow any march to the Central Business District. I mean, how then will the opposition draw the line here to confine itself at the Kamukunji grounds and not march to the Central Business District, for that has not been legalized by the authorities?
First of all, thank you, Ayub, for having me in your show today. And I want to start by probably giving an account of why this day is significant. Because, like I was telling you, many of us probably were either not born or we were infants. You know, I think I was around 2 years, 3 years thereabout by the time the first Saba occurred. And significantly, it was a process driven by young Turks then. Coincidentally, a good chunk of them who have aged today are still very visible and are probably still taking a front row in discussions to do with Saba. I think what really transpired was that these were young people agitating for a change in terms of opening up the democratic space for our country. Their intentions were clear, their objectives were patriotic, and the cause was worth it. Unfortunately, they were met with resistance by the police, and a number of the then leaders were injured, others even killed. And I think that's why Saba is significant. So today must be another opportunity for us to showcase young Turks and showcase a new kind of leadership. Because as at 1990, the space was very shrinked, the democratic space was very shrinked. In fact, even the thought of entertaining emerging leaders was not entertained by the then Kanu regime. But today we are living in a much more constitutional, democratically driven space. Kenyans have an opportunity to picket, Kenyans have an opportunity to demonstrate, Kenyans have an opportunity to express alternative opinion. And I think that should be important, especially for those of us who are still fresh in political leadership. But having said that, Ayub, and maybe to jump into your question, I think what is significant is that we must also exercise our democratic practice in a much more objective way and patriotic, to say the least. Because as we open up the democratic space, we must also be responsible enough to be mindful about the other people who probably might not be participating in this. And I think significantly, probably that's why the police are restricting movement, because we have seen in the past what protests have translated to. You have people's properties being damaged. You have incidences of people being forced to carry stones. You know, you remember in, was it in Donholm? There are people who are being told as they go to work, you must carry a stone or otherwise we will stone you. So those are scenes that are not necessary in this age. Because like I said, Ayub, we had a challenge in 1990 in terms of our space to express ourselves. But in 2023, I think that space has already been opened. I think we have a tolerant government and country that is responsible enough to allow for alternative voice.
But at what point? Because you have mentioned, and Samba Buloma, of the rupture that normally follows and the accompanying standoff between the authorities and the protesters. You look at Adamson Bungei, he said yesterday that we have legalized the gathering at the Kamukunji grounds, but the authorities wouldn't allow the march to the Nairobi Central Business District. You heard from the MPs there, the leader of the majority party at Nairobi County Assembly, Peter Imwatok, saying that we are peaceful people and we just want to conduct our affairs in a peaceful manner. They are all citing both the authorities and the opposition members peaceful, and that seems to be the common word there. But at what point does the friction come about? Because they're all calling for peaceful outcomes.
The friction comes about, you know, there are people who will definitely take advantage. So if you're doing a march all the way from Kamkunji to the CBD, of course you're exposing businesses, people's businesses. You're exposing many Kenyans who want to go about their normal way of life to the risk of being subjected to violence unnecessarily. And the question that begs is that, what's the significance of marching to the CBD? You know, what are we trying to achieve? And that's a question that probably the opposition needs to answer. And what I think the police have done is that they have allowed them to actually utilize the spaces available that are friendly or conducive for such kind of a meeting. But today is a normal working day. There are people who want to go about their business. We're already talking about tough, hard economic times. We do not want to disadvantage anyone who wants to transact on their normal business. So I think it would be prudent for them to actually restrict themselves. And I think previous Sabasabas, a lot of them have just been concentrated in Kamukunji. So this should not be an exception. But having said that, again, if the police must be able to manifest themselves, they must do this responsibly, because we must not showcase the ugly side of things, because you remember the history of Saba. It was associated with violence meted by the police. So probably our police systems must exercise a sense of responsiveness so that they do not appear to be provoking violence or perpetuating acts of violence.
Jeremiah, coming to you. I'm trying to draw a distinction between what the Saba of 1990 intended to achieve and what in 2023, according to the opposition, they want to achieve. For example, in 1990, they were against the one-party suppressive rule by KANU to open up the space at least for political parties to emerge and crop up. In 2023, the opposition says that they are against inaction by the government to address the high cost of living in the country, including the passing of the Finance Bill, now an act, following its signing into law by the president. And as a young person, as a young leader who probably wasn't born at the time, I mean, what's your understanding of the sense of the significance this day bears in the calendar and the actual day of it happening in 2023 and what the opposition wants to achieve?
Ayub, I confirm that I wasn't born at the time, but I have taken time to appreciate Kenya's history. And what bothers me is that what we're having today is an abuse and an insult to the Saba of those days. Because I always ask a question which has never been answered. Where was Raila Amolo Odinga when the cost of living went up? You know, the cost of living did not go up when William Samoei Ruto took the government, when Kenya Kwanza took the government. So where were these people when the cost of living went up? So the rationale behind it, what is the reasoning of why we're having these protests today? I know people are quoting peaceful and all that, but I think we have seen, and we cannot sit here and pretend that we do not know what has been happening when these protests have been called for. We've seen that children have not been able to go to school. We've seen businesses being destroyed. We've seen stones. We've seen cars being burnt down and vandalized. And at the end of the day, Ayub, we must think as a nation, where do we want to go? What is the way forward? Azimio and Kenya Kwanza went to the bipartisan talks, you know, and Azimio was making unnecessary demands. And the demands they were making are demands that are centered around their own selfish interests. These are not demands that were going to cater for the common mananchi. So what do they want out of this? What they're using is riding the wave, because the cost of living is high. And I cannot stay here or deny the same on national television. But they're using that to ensure that they are riding a wave to push their selfish agenda from where I stand. And at the end of the day, Ayub, I mean, we must progress as a democracy. We went to the elections on 9th of August. Azimio has never recognized to date the legitimacy of the presidency of William Samoei Ruto. So what is the agenda? That is a key question that we should be asking and setting the narrative as the media. And we have to look at both sides of the divide. The finance bill that they are claiming now they're fighting was a do-or-die situation for the nation. It was a catch-22 situation for the president. We are in debt. We need to service our debt. The 2 billion euro bond is coming up by June next year. It has to be serviced. We need to service recurrent expenditure. We need to service development. Where is that money going to come from? The government has to raise money. And at the end of the day, Remember how Greece went, right? They decided to take the expansionary fiscal policy. We took a contractionary one, and we did not have a choice to make. We have to ensure that we understand the perspective of running government and where we are as a people. So for me, the process on the Saba, it's an insult to the original Saba. These are people who are driven by selfish interests, who just feel so riled up that they did not win the election in the 2022 general election.
Well, critics of the political establishment to which you subscribe to, Honorable Njeri Maina, would also point out that there is a very evident and the apparent common selfish sort of style that underpins members of the political establishment. When you say that the opposition is being selfish to gather and mark Saba today at the Kamukunji grounds, some would say some of what you campaigned upon and the premise with which you had rallied upon Kenyans to vote for you as the Kenya Kwanza administration also tends to border or is in line with selfishness. For example, then Deputy President and the UDA presidential candidate, President William Ruto, denied the impact of the Ukraine-Russia war on the Kenyan economy. Later on, he came to accept of the consequences this had bared on the global food supply chain. And that seems to be the tendency that Kenyan politicians often adopt when it comes to serving their own personal interests and deny the logic.
I'm laughing at you because that is a campaign rhetoric, right? And you know that even during the campaigns, as Mia would say, whatever they would say to win the hearts of Kenyans. And at the end of the day, you know, you take up leadership and you realize the real situation on the ground, and it has to be faced. And if this government fails, it is the people of Kenya who will fail. So I do not even see why Azimio should be derailing the government agenda. The budget that we passed focused on key areas. We funded healthcare, we funded agriculture, we've put 5 billion for subsidized fertilizer so that we can ensure that we have production, increased production from the farmers so that we can lower the cost of living. So at the end of the day, let us support the government of the day so that we can move forward as a people.
Okay. Philip Hande, coming to you. You told me you are not born at the time.
Absolutely.
But what does the opposition, as a supporter of the Azimio coalition political party, intend to achieve in reawakening the Saba cause, and what do you intend to achieve with today's gathering at the Kamukunji grounds?
Very well, Ayub. Once again, thanks for having me, and a good morning to Kenyans. I must begin by saying that one Martin Luther King said, we begin, or our lives begin ending when we become silent about what matters. And at this time, what matters in Kenya and what is taking center stage is the cost of living, is the runaway cost of transport, is the runaway cost of educating our children in tertiary institutions. It's putting food on the tables. It's affording a 2-kilogram packet of sugar, which is now equated to a 50-kilogram bag of cement, and so forth, Ayub. So today, the opposition in Kenya and many other practitioners in the civil society, the religious institutions, and Kenyans at large are concerning themselves with the discussions around how can we afford life? How can we make it possible for the people at the bottom of the pyramid to survive? We are living at denting economic times. Of course, we have the history of COVID. We have many other happenings at the global stage, including the contraction of the global GDP by about 3% in 2023. But then we cannot limit the conversation to Raila Amolo Odinga and the president, like my colleague Mheshimiwa Njeri has tried to do it. This is a conversation about the reality, the situation that is facing Kenya today, and how do we lift people out of poverty. Aristotle says poverty is the parent of revolution and crime. And even today, we have so many quotes and so many remarks about poverty and associating that with, you know, what happens to the common Kenyans. So today, the common discussion in any media space, in any household, in any street, is about the cost of living. And the cost of living is not about Raila Amolo Odinga. It's not about the opposition. How do we as Kenyans feel? So let's first of all remove the discussion from who is proposing this or who is talking about this, and talk about the reality and the situations and circumstances that face the nation, as it were. Then at that point, we are going to be telling the truth to Kenyans. Now, the second thing is, what do we intend to achieve as Kenyans, not as an opposition? As Kenyans, we expect that we have a listening government, because government is supposed to serve the people. Government is supposed to respond to the issues that press on us. It is mentioned by Mheshimiwa here that Kenya has taken a fiscal contractory policy approach towards dealing with our economy today. It's not the case. We have expanded taxes, our tax bracket, but at the same time, we've expanded our expenditure, especially recurrent expenditure. The budget today is only spending 18% on development. The rest is on recurrent expenditure. On a daily basis, we have a state house that is spending 8.5 million in terms of estimation on hospitality alone. Now, how do we change that conversation from a state house and a government that is overspending on recurrent expenditure on things that we could otherwise avoid to giving an equivalent of what people could enjoy in terms of affording the maize flowers, affording the cost of sugar, affording school fees, and subsidizing or making life possible for every other person that lives in this country today.
Okay,
so,
but as you make your submission, Philip, I get the broad brush painting of the government's inaction, of what you believe is the government's inaction. But again, sort of detaching members of the Azimio coalition political party, who by extension bear the responsibility of why Kenya is in such a state. For example, you have constantly mentioned the Kenyan people. The Kenyan people have the right to get proper health care, education, good infrastructure, and general service delivered from the government. They have played their part since 1963. They have paid the taxes as required. They have been loyal to the government that has been in place ever since we gained independence. But doesn't the pool of politicians Kenya has had ever since independence then bear the responsibility? And why do you detach, for example, opposition leaders from why we are in such a state at the moment, unable to pay properly teachers, unable to properly pay doctors, and other civil servants who play a critical role, and this largely is a policy problem that also the opposition bears? I mean, where do you draw the line? Why detach the opposition from the real reality on the ground?
Good question, Ayub. Recently, the opposition leader and the entire opposition gave certain proposals on how, for example, Kenya ought to budget at this particular time. And you remember the Right Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga talking to us about starting from zero, a zero-based budget. So what do we mean in this approach? That it must not always start from the last fiscal year, we bought furniture worth 10 million for our offices. So this year, it can't be less than 10 million. It has to be a top-up on the 10 million we had last year. I mean, if we had motor vehicle, for example, for some of the things that have been under scrutiny is, for example, luxury vehicles for the executive. If the former office was using a motorcade that was still within the age framework, 7 years or 8 years, why would you go and buy a new fleet altogether? It means that we are not spending in terms of priority. We are not budgeting pro-poor. If you look at our budget in health, our budget in education, our budget in agriculture, and vis-a-vis what we are spending in other areas of the economy, you realize that we are not budgeting for mwananchi. Universal health coverage, for example, was part of the agenda, the Big Four agenda of the previous government. And in part of that, there was a pilot in 4 counties.
Kisumu, Nyeri,
Isiolo, Machakos, that benefited from the pilot of universal healthcare. Where is universal healthcare today? So in terms of policy shift, it's not about the opposition. It's the person that the buck stops with. The buck stops with the government and people who hold policy responsibility. Somebody from the outside can only help you point at the mistakes or the opportunities that you are missing. And we have done that as an opposition, and the former PM and the entire team has told us, let us begin from zero and not topping up unnecessary votes.
Well, policy also then encompasses the entire pool of people we have who are in policy positions to inform that.
Absolutely.
Of course, no regard for whether you're in government or the opposition.
But we've also seen, Ayub, how we use our numbers in Parliament in terms of
there are some explanations to make as to why your members of Parliament had walked out on the most important part of when the bill was in Parliament. Honorable Maina Karubia, will today's events at the Kamukunji grounds rekindle the course we had in 1990?
Thank you, Ayub, for hosting me. Sorry for coming late, but when we are going to heaven, I can tell you I'll come early. But this is the point. I'm surprised that my brother has joined the Azimio, but we had a private conversation and he told me he wants to join the side of government. But it's okay.
That's not true.
But the point is... Yes, okay. But this is the point. Ayub, politics of 2022 or 2023 is totally different from the politics of 1990s. You see, Ayub, answering your question about whether we are going to go back to the 1990s, I must say that power is an abstract subject, is a dynamic subject. The way we used to approach power in early 19th century or early 1900s is totally different from the way we are approaching power in 2020s. In the beginning of the 20th century, we used to have people going to the forest, acquiring power through the hard way of going to the forest, using guns and what have you. You come to the 1990s, people would go to the streets. But I can tell you, Ayub, if somebody is imagining that he can assume power or he can have a considerable influence by going to the street in the 21st century, he or she is mistaken. And that's why you find even nations, let me talk from a nation's point of view, even nations that are using bombs in this century to try to wield power or try to amass influence on the global stage are actually not convincing enough. The approach to power in this century is not going to the streets. The approach to influence in this century is not using hard way to acquire power. You have to be smart. You have to be innovative. You have to identify convincing and persuasive strategies. And I'm using this as a pro bono advice to Azimio Wing, that the approach that they were using in the 1990s to cajole and manipulate government to certain ways of doing things is not the way they should be using in this century. They need to be innovative, and we are challenging them because so that we don't become what my CEO, in fact he is my CEO in the Kenya Young Parliamentarians Association. We don't go to the extent of having people become victims of this maandamano. When I was coming to this show, I came with a victim of what Raila Odinga was doing 2 months ago, burning around shops and ransacking private businesses. I have a victim in the vehicle who is a testament of what maandamano can do. Somebody who had a small shop of cosmetics and beauty, a young person of our republic, things were taken from her shop, and she doesn't have a livelihood now. She's depending on well-wishers to sustain her livelihood in Nairobi. That is the extent to what maandamano can mean. And I think you and I know that there are different ways that you can express yourself and you are heard. I think maandamano and what Raila Odinga is trying to use now is not something that we can use. And it begs the question, why did he stop? Why is he reverting? Does he know that, is there something that he was asking and it was not fulfilled for him to now turn back to what he was doing 2 months ago. Okay. I think we need to be genuine. If we are following a course of maandamano, follow it to the latter. Don't stop along the way, because now, as an ordinary Kenyan, I'll ask myself, why did you stop 2 months ago, and now you have come back,
okay,
and you are complaining to us?
Okay, we proceed with the discussion on what the opposition seeks to achieve from today's gathering at the Kamukunji grounds, where it said they have march to the Central Business District despite an order by police to not do so, and that the authorities will not allow the marching to the Central Business District, for the government has only enabled the opposition to meet at the Kamukunji grounds, for that has been the legalized part of their protests. This is Daybreak on Citizen Television. When we get back from the break, we continue the discussion with Honorable Maina Karobia, Philip Pande, Njeri Maina, and Anthony Samba Buluma. We as well welcome your contributions here on the broadcast. The hashtag on Twitter is Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. Stay tuned.